They called humans the silent death across 17 star systems. Not because we were quiet. We were anything but. We screamed our war cries, blasted music during combat, and our engines roared like ancient beasts. They called us silent, because when the smoke cleared and the dust settled, no enemy ever lived long enough to tell others what they had witnessed. For 300 years, the Galactic Coalition had maintained peace through superior technology and overwhelming numbers. Plasma cannons that could glass planets, shield generators that could deflect asteroid impacts, and armies numbering in the billions. They had never encountered a species that fought like it had nothing left to lose, because for most civilized races, survival was the primary objective. But humans had a saying, the only easy day was yesterday. When the Zephyrian Hive declared war on the Coalition and began systematically exterminating entire worlds, the galactic community did what they had always done. They formed committees, held emergency sessions, and deployed their vast technological superiority. For 18 months, they lost ground every single day. That's when someone remembered the small blue planet on the outer rim, the one whose inhabitants had been politely declined membership in the Coalition for being too primitive and aggressive. The same planet whose representatives had smiled politely and said, "Call us if you ever need help with the rough stuff." The Coalition was about to learn why predators don't negotiate with prey, they simply hunt. Admiral Kithara had seen death on a scale that would drive lesser beings to madness. As the supreme military commander of the Galactic Coalition, she had witnessed the obliteration of 14 worlds in the past 18 months, each one falling to the relentless advance of the Zephyrian Hive. The insectoid species had emerged from the galactic core like a plague, their biomechanical ships devouring everything in their path, converting matter into more soldiers, more ships, more weapons. Standing in the command center of the Coalition flagship Harmony's Edge, Kythara's four eyes tracked the holographic display showing the current state of the war. Red markers indicated Zephyrian-controlled territory, a spreading cancer that now encompassed nearly a quarter of known space. Each red dot represented billions of lives lost, entire civilizations reduced to biomass for the Hive's endless hunger. "Admiral," came the voice of Commander Tylex, the Altarian tactical officer whose blue-scaled features betrayed none of the fear that Kythara could smell in his pheromone signature. "The Kepler defense grid has gone silent. Long-range sensors indicate complete orbital bombardment. Estimated time until total planetary consumption. 6 standard hours. 6 hours. 16 billion souls on Kepler 7 would be processed into biological components for the Hive's war machine." The Coalition's most advanced planetary shield generators, their quantum torpedo batteries, their gravity well projectors, all of it had lasted less than 3 days against the Zephyrian assault. "Any word from the evacuation fleets?" Kythara asked, though she already knew the answer. The Hive didn't allow evacuations. They needed the biological material too badly. "Negative, Admiral. All civilian transports were intercepted in the outer system. No survivors detected." Kythara's mandibles clicked in frustration, a unconscious gesture that had become more frequent as the war dragged on. The Coalition had been the apex of galactic civilization for over 3 centuries, bringing together 47 different species under a banner of mutual prosperity and peaceful coexistence. Their technology was advanced, their armies vast, their logistics unparalleled. They had ended the last great galactic war through superior firepower and strategic brilliance. But the Zephyrians didn't fight like any enemy they had ever faced. They didn't seek territory or resources in the traditional sense. They consumed, they adapted, and they learned. Every weapon the Coalition deployed was analyzed, countered, and improved upon by the Hive within days. Energy shields that had proven impenetrable for centuries were breached by new forms of bioacid that ate through quantum fields themselves. Plasma cannons that could crack moons were shrugged off by carapaces that somehow dispersed the energy harmlessly. Artificial intelligence networks were infiltrated and corrupted by Zephyrian biocomputers that operated on principles Coalition scientists couldn't even understand. The war room doors hissed open, admitting Chancellor Mortius, the Trilarian politician whose normally immaculate purple robes now showed the strain of too many sleepless cycles. His 3-fingered hands trembled slightly as he approached Kythara's command station, and his usually melodious voice carried an edge of desperation. "Admiral, I've just concluded a session with the Emergency Council. The situation is..." He paused, searching for diplomatic words to describe the complete collapse of everything they had built. Untenable. Kythara fixed him with all 4 of her eyes. "Speak plainly, Chancellor. How many more worlds do we have? At current rate of loss, our defensive perimeter will collapse within 2 standard months." After that, Mortius gestured helplessly at the holographic display. The Hive will have access to the core worlds. Altair Prime, New Trillos, even the Coalition capital itself. The implications hung in the air like a funeral shroud. The end of galactic civilization, the consumption of 1 trillion souls, the transformation of known space into an endless feeding ground for an alien intelligence that viewed sapient life as nothing more than raw material. There must be something, Kithara insisted. Some weapon we haven't deployed, some strategy we haven't considered. The research divisions, the black projects, all exhausted, Admiral. Mortius pulled up his own holographic display, showing classified files that made Kithara's stomachs turn. Project Starfire failed when the Hive adapted to Nova-level plasma temperatures. The quantum disruption arrays were consumed and reverse-engineered within hours of deployment. Even the Genesis Protocol, he didn't need to finish. The Genesis Protocol had been the Coalition's ultimate weapon, a device that could restructure matter at the atomic level, turning entire systems into weapons against the enemy. It had been deployed exactly once against a Zephyrian staging area in the Outer Rim. Within 6 hours, the Hive had not only defended against it, but had begun producing their own versions, turned against Coalition forces. Every advantage became a disadvantage. Every strength became a weapon pointed at their own throats. There is one possibility, Mortius said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But the Council considers it a last resort that borders on desperation. Kithara's antennae twitched. In her 300 years of military service, she had never heard that particular tone of uncertainty in the Chancellor's voice. What possibility? Mortius manipulated his display, bringing up a star chart that showed the Outer Rim territories beyond the official borders of Coalition space. A small blue dot pulsed in the darkness, marked with symbols that Kithara hadn't seen in decades. Sol System, Mortius said, 3rd planet. The humans. The command center fell silent. Every officer, every technician, every analyst turned to stare at the display. Kithara felt her secondary heart skip a beat. The humans? She repeated. The primitives who were denied Coalition membership 40 years ago? The same, Mortius confirmed. Though primitive may be an outdated assessment. Our intelligence indicates they've been quite busy since our last formal contact. Kithara remembered the human delegation that had arrived at Coalition headquarters 4 decades ago. They had been strange creatures, bipedal mammals with forward-facing eyes and an unsettling tendency to show their teeth when they were pleased. Their technology had been barely adequate for interstellar travel, their ships crude chemical rockets compared to Coalition gravity drives. Their weapons were kinetic projectiles and explosive charges, laughably primitive compared to plasma artillery and particle beams. But there had been something about them that had disturbed the Coalition Council, the way they moved with predatory grace. The way their eyes tracked everything, like hunters constantly evaluating threats and opportunities. The way they had politely listened to explanations of why they weren't ready for galactic civilization, nodded thoughtfully, and then smiled those toothy smiles and said, "No problem. Call us if you ever need help with the rough stuff." Their technology was centuries behind ours, Kithara pointed out. Chemical propulsion, kinetic weapons, primitive computing systems. What could they possibly offer that our combined might cannot provide? Mortius brought up another file, this one marked with the highest security classifications. Recent intelligence suggests they've been developing rapidly. Trade missions report technological advances that don't match their expected development curve. There are also concerning reports about their military culture, such as they have something called Marines, Admiral, elite soldiers who specialize in what they call hostile environment combat. Our xenopsychologists studying their cultural transmissions believe these Marines are trained specifically for fighting in situations where defeat means extinction. Kithara's mandibles clicked again, faster this time. All soldiers fight to avoid defeat, Chancellor. No, Admiral. You don't understand. Mortius pulled up cultural analysis files, showing transcripts of human military communications, training protocols, and something called doctrine that made Kithara's kitten crawl. These Marines train to fight when defeat is inevitable. They have elaborate cultural rituals around fighting hopeless battles. They consider it honorable to die in combat rather than surrender, but only after inflicting maximum damage on their enemies. Suicidal tendencies Commander Philex observed from his station, a psychological defect that would make them unreliable allies. No, Mortius said, his voice growing quieter. Not suicidal, something else. Something our psychologists can't properly categorize. They fight like prey animals that somehow became apex predators. They have sayings, Admiral. Military mottos that our analysts find deeply disturbing. He brought up a list of translated human military phrases. Cathara read them with growing unease.
Death before dishonor. No retreat, no surrender. The only easy day was yesterday. Pain is weakness leaving the body. Improvise, adapt, overcome.
If you're going through hell, keep going. Each phrase was annotated with cultural context that painted a picture of a species that had evolved not just to survive, but to thrive in conditions that would break the spirit of most civilized beings.
A species that viewed suffering as character building, that considered overwhelming odds a form of entertainment, that had turned warfare into an art form practiced with religious devotion. There's more, Mortius continued. Intelligence reports indicate they've been monitoring galactic communications. They know about the war, they know about our losses, and they've been preparing. Preparing how? We don't know, Admiral. But 3 weeks ago, a human delegation arrived at the Coalition Embassy on Proxima Station. They requested a meeting with the Emergency Council. The message they left was brief. Mortius brought up an audio file. A human voice speaking accented galactic standard filled the command center. To the Galactic Coalition Emergency Council. This is Colonel Sarah Chen, representing the United Earth Defense Force. We've been watching the news about your bug problem. Looks like you could use some pest control. We've got Marines who specialize in difficult extractions. If you're interested in discussing professional consultation, we'll be waiting for your call. Chen out. The recording ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Pest control? Kithara repeated. They're comparing the most dangerous threat in galactic history to insects in their homes? It gets worse, Admiral, Mortius said, bringing up the final file in his collection. After they left that message, our intelligence services attempted to gather more recent information about human military capabilities. What we found was limited. Most of their military developments are classified beyond our ability to penetrate. But we did find this. The holographic display shifted to show a single image, a human soldier in strange armor, standing in what appeared to be the aftermath of a battle. The landscape was cratered and burning, alien structures reduced to twisted metal and organic debris. The human was removing a helmet, revealing a face smeared with ash, and something that might have been blood. But it was the expression that made Kithara's blood run cold. The human was smiling, not the polite diplomatic smile she remembered from 40 years ago. This was something else entirely. The smile of a predator that had just finished feeding, the smile of a creature that had found something it loved in the midst of destruction and chaos. Below the image was a caption in human script, translated into Galactic Standard, Gunnery Sergeant Maria Vasquez, 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marine Regiment, after successful hostile environment operation on Kepler. 442B. Quote, just another day at the office. Kithara stared at the image for a long moment, her 4 eyes trying to process what she was seeing. The background showed destruction on a scale that suggested the use of weapons beyond anything humans were supposed to possess. The soldiers' equipment looked like nothing in any intelligence file she had seen. And that smile. Admiral, Commander Thylek said hesitantly, even if the humans have improved their technology, they're still a single species from one world. How could they possibly make a difference against the Hive? Before Kithara could respond, her communication officer spoke up from across the command center. Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Nexus defense grid. Admiral Correx is requesting immediate assistance. The Zephyrian advance fleet has broken through the outer perimeter. Kithara felt her stomach drop. The Nexus system was the key to the Coalition's entire defensive strategy. If it fell, there would be nothing between the Hive and the core world but empty space and desperate hopes. Time until the Hive reaches Nexus Prime? 6 days, Admiral. Maybe less if they deploy the new bioships. 6 days. She looked again at the image of the smiling human marine standing in the ruins of what had obviously been a fierce battle. Pest control, they had called it. Professional consultation, Chancellor, she said finally. How quickly can we get a message to Earth? Mortius consulted his display. Quantum communication to Sol System would take approximately 18 hours for a response, assuming they agree to immediate talks. And how quickly could they deploy forces to the Nexus system? Unknown, Admiral. We have no current intelligence on their fleet capabilities or deployment speed. Kithara made a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago, when the Coalition still believed in the invincibility of civilized warfare conducted according to the rules of galactic society. But 6 months ago, there had been hope. Now there was only the choice between desperate gambles and certain extinction. Send the message, she ordered. Tell them the Galactic Coalition formally requests military assistance under the Mutual Defense Protocols. Tell them we need those Marines they mentioned. Admiral, Chancellor Mortius said carefully, we don't actually have mutual defense protocols with Earth. They were never admitted to the Coalition. Kithara's mandibles clicked one final time, a sound like breaking glass in the silence of the command center. Outside the massive viewport, she could see the distant flashes of weapons fire as Coalition forces made their desperate stand against the advancing darkness. Then tell them, she said, that we're asking for help, from one struggling species to another. Tell them the galaxy is dying, and we don't know how to save it. The message went out 18 hours later, transmitted across the void to a small blue planet that had once been dismissed as too primitive for civilized company. The response came back in less than 6 hours, which should have been impossible given the limitations of quantum communication arrays. To Admiral Kithara, Coalition Defense Forces. This is General Patricia Morrison, Commandant of the Marine Corps. We've reviewed your situation and we're prepared to provide immediate assistance. Our rapid response force is already en route to your coordinates. Estimated arrival, 4 days. We'll handle your bug problem. Morrison out. 4 days. It should have taken at least 2 weeks for any force to travel from Sol System to Coalition space, even with the most advanced gravity drive technology. Kithara stared at the response message, wondering what other surprises the humans had been developing during their 40 years of polite isolation. She was about to find out why the Terran Marines had earned a reputation that spread across 17 star systems, whispered in the aftermath of battles where impossibly outnumbered human forces had somehow emerged victorious. She was about to learn what it meant when someone who had evolved on a planet where everything tried to kill them decided to return the favor on a galactic scale. In 4 days, the Zephyrian Hive would discover why even the most advanced predators in the galaxy had learned to fear the species that had once hunted mammoths with sharpened sticks and considered it good sport. The silent death was coming. The first sign that something was wrong with the humans' arrival came when Admiral Kithara's sensor operators reported contact with unidentified vessels at the edge of the Nexus system, 12 hours ahead of their estimated arrival time. That's impossible, Commander Thylex muttered, his blue scales rippling with confusion as he studied the sensor readings. Even with advanced gravity drives, they couldn't have traveled that distance in less than 3 standard days. Kithara studied the tactical display with growing unease. The human fleet, if it could be called a fleet, consisted of only 12 vessels according to the sensors. 12 ships to face down a Zephyrian armada that had already consumed 14 worlds and showed no signs of slowing its advance toward Coalition core systems. Size and configuration of the human vessels, she asked. Unknown, Admiral. Our sensors are having difficulty getting clear readings. The ships appear to be using some form of stealth technology that interferes with both electromagnetic and quantum detection arrays. We can tell they're there, but detailed scans are problematic. That was the second troubling sign. Coalition sensor technology had been refined over centuries of peaceful cooperation between species. Their arrays could detect a single ship at ranges measured in light years, analyze its structural composition from millions of kilometers away, and predict its capabilities based on energy signatures and hull configuration.
For human ships to confound these systems suggested technological advances that made no sense given their primitive origins.
Open a communication channel, Kithara ordered. Standard diplomatic frequencies. The response came immediately, before her communication officer could even complete the connection protocol. A human face appeared on the primary display. A woman with steel-gray hair, sharp green eyes, and features that looked like they had been carved from stone. Her uniform was unlike anything in Kithara's databases. Matte black with minimal insignia, and what appeared to be functional armor plating integrated into the fabric itself. Admiral Kithara, the woman said without preamble. General Patricia Morrison, United Earth Marine Corps. Permission to come aboard your flagship for tactical briefing. General Morrison, Kithara replied, trying to maintain diplomatic protocols even as her mind raced with questions. Welcome to Coalition space. However, we should discuss your deployment strategy via communication link first. The tactical situation is extremely complex and negative, Morrison interrupted, her tone carrying an edge that suggested she wasn't accustomed to having her requests questioned. I need to see your tactical data firsthand, review your defensive positions, and assess your personnel capabilities. Face-to-face briefing is standard operating procedure for joint operations. Joint operations? Kithara's mandibles clicked. The humans were treating this as if they were the senior partners in the engagement, which was absurd considering they were outnumbered several thousand to one by coalition forces already in system. Very well, General. Our shuttle bay can accommodate. That won't be necessary, Morrison said. I'll be coming over in my own transport. Morrison out. The communication cut before Kithara could respond, leaving the command center in stunned silence. In 300 years of military service, she had never been dismissed so casually by an ally, let alone one whose entire contribution to the battle consisted of 12 ships against an enemy that traveled in fleets numbering in the thousands. Admiral, her sensor operator called out, his voice tinged with confusion. I'm reading a small craft departing from the human formation, but this is very strange. Define strange, Lieutenant. The craft isn't following normal trajectory patterns, Admiral. It's moving differently, like it's ignoring several fundamental laws of physics. Kithara moved to the sensor station and stared at the readings in disbelief. The human transport was indeed moving in ways that violated everything she knew about spacecraft maneuvering. It accelerated without visible thruster discharge, changed direction without momentum compensation, and seemed to be covering distance at rates that should have been impossible for something that small. Time to arrival? She asked. At current speed? Approximately 6 minutes, Admiral. 6 minutes. It should have taken at least 2 hours for a shuttle to travel from the human fleet's position to the Coalition flagship, even with the most advanced propulsion systems. Kithara found herself wondering if the humans had somehow developed technology that surpassed Coalition science by centuries, rather than decades. The human transport arrived exactly 6 minutes later, sliding into the shuttle bay with a grace that defied the laws of orbital mechanics. Through the bay's observation windows, Kithara watched as the craft settled onto the deck without any visible landing thrusters, as if gravity itself had simply decided to cooperate with human engineering. The transport itself was unlike anything in her experience. Where Coalition shuttles were elegant curves of advanced alloys designed for efficiency and aesthetic appeal, the human craft looked like it had been built for war. Angular, aggressive, covered in what appeared to be weapons systems that had no business being mounted on a diplomatic transport. Even powered down, it radiated a sense of barely contained violence that made Kithara's instincts scream warnings about apex predators in confined spaces. General Morrison emerged from the transport accompanied by 2 other humans, both wearing the same matte black uniforms but with additional equipment that looked suspiciously like personal combat gear. The General herself moved with a fluid precision that reminded Kithara uncomfortably of the hunting patterns she had studied in xenobiology. Economy of motion, constant awareness of environment, the subtle way she positioned herself so that nothing could approach without being seen. The humans were escorted to the main briefing room, where Kithara had assembled her senior staff and tactical analysts. As they filed in, she noticed that each human carried themselves with the same predatory awareness, their forward-facing eyes constantly tracking movement, their hands never far from equipment that definitely wasn't standard diplomatic gear. General Morrison, Kithara began, activating the holographic display that showed the current tactical situation. Thank you for responding so quickly to our request for assistance. As you can see, the Zephyrian Advance Force is currently... I can see the bugs, Morrison interrupted, studying the display with an expression that Kithara couldn't quite read. Question is, why are you still here? The blunt question caught everyone off guard. Chancellor Mortius, who had arrived for the briefing, sputtered with diplomatic indignation. I beg your pardon, General, but Coalition forces are maintaining defensive positions according to established military doctrine. Doctrine that's gotten you your ass kicked for 18 months, Morrison said without looking away from the tactical display. You're fighting a defensive war against an enemy that doesn't take territory, it consumes it. Every day you hold a position is another day they're analyzing your defenses and adapting their attack strategies. She gestured to the hologram showing the massive Zephyrian fleet slowly advancing toward the inner system. How many times have you tried the same tactics against these things? Our military strategies are based on 3 centuries of successful, Commander Thylex began. How many times? Morrison repeated, her voice cutting through the commander's explanation like a blade. Admiral Kithara felt her stomachs tighten. Every defensive strategy we've deployed has been... Every defensive strategy. Adapted to and overcome within days of implementation. And you keep trying variations of the same approaches because that's what worked against civilized enemies. Morrison finally turned to face the assembled coalition officers, and Kithara was struck again by those predatory eyes. Here's the problem. The Zephyrians aren't civilized. They're not interested in negotiation, territorial boundaries, or preserving infrastructure. They want to eat you and everything you've ever built. We are aware of the nature of the threat, General, Chancellor Morteus said stiffly. But the coalition military has extensive experience in losing, Morrison finished. You have extensive experience in losing to these things. Which is why you called us. She moved to the tactical display and began manipulating the controls with a familiarity that shouldn't have been possible for someone using coalition technology for the first time. The hologram shifted, showing new data overlays that Kithara didn't recognize. Your problem is that you're fighting the war they want you to fight, Morrison continued. Stand-up battles, defensive positions, organized retreats. You're giving them time to study your weapons, analyze your tactics, and improve their countermeasures. Meanwhile, you're losing ships and planets while they're gaining strength. Then what do you suggest? Kithara asked, genuinely curious despite her growing unease about the humans' casual dismissal of coalition military doctrine. Morrison smiled and Kithara felt her blood turn cold. It was the same expression she had seen in that intelligence photograph. The smile of a predator that had found something it enjoyed in the midst of chaos and destruction. We don't fight the war they want, Morrison said simply. We fight the war they can't adapt to. Which is? One where they're too busy dying to study our tactics. The general manipulated the display again, bringing up real-time sensor data from the human fleet. For the first time, Kithara got a clear look at the vessels that had somehow crossed impossible distances in impossible time. What she saw made no sense. The ships were massive, each one easily the size of a coalition battlecruiser, but their design philosophy was completely alien to everything she understood about spacecraft construction. Where coalition vessels were sleek and efficient, the human ships looked like flying cities of war, bristling with weapon systems, armored like mobile fortresses, and equipped with technology that her sensors couldn't even properly identify. Admiral, she said carefully, these ships represent technology far in advance of what our intelligence indicated your species possessed. How is this possible? Morrison exchanged glances with her two companions, and Kithara caught something that looked like amusement in their expressions. Admiral, how much do you know about human military development over the past 40 years? Our intelligence suggests steady but unremarkable progress consistent with a developing industrial civilization. Chemical propulsion replaced with basic fusion drives, kinetic weapons supplemented with early energy systems, computational advances in line with expected technological growth curves. Right, Morrison said. That's what we wanted you to think. The words hung in the air like a confession of espionage that reached back decades. Kithara felt her secondary heart skip a beat as the implications sank in. You've been deliberately concealing your technological development? Commander Thylex asked, his voice tight with something between anger and fear. We've been preparing, Morrison replied simply. 40 years ago, when your coalition decided we were too primitive for membership, we took it as a learning experience. We studied your technology, your military doctrine, your political structures, and we came to some interesting conclusions. She gestured to the tactical display showing the Zephyrian advance. First conclusion. Civilized warfare between advanced species tends to follow predictable patterns. Rules of engagement, preservation of infrastructure, minimization of collateral damage. Very orderly. Very restrained. Civilization requires restraint, General, Chancellor Mortius said. The alternative is barbarism. Maybe, Morrison agreed. But barbarism has some tactical advantages when you're facing an enemy that wants to eat your entire species. Second conclusion. Advanced civilizations tend to become comfortable with their technological superiority. You build bigger ships, more powerful weapons, better defenses, but you don't fundamentally change how you think about warfare. She brought up new data showing comparative analyses of coalition and Zephyrian forces. You're fighting a technological war against an evolutionary war. They're not trying to out-engineer you, they're trying to out-adapt you. And they're winning because they're playing a completely different game. And humans play this game differently? Kithara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Morrison's smile widened, and Kithara noticed that human teeth were remarkably sharp for an supposedly omnivorous species. Admiral, we've been playing evolutionary warfare since we learned to walk upright. We didn't become the dominant species on Earth by building better tools than the other predators. We became dominant because we learned to use any tool, any environment, any circumstance as a weapon. She manipulated the display again, showing tactical projections that made Kithara's mandibles click involuntarily. Third conclusion. The Zephyrians have been adapting to fight civilized enemies using civilized tactics. They've never faced an enemy that fights like what? Commander Thylex prompted. Like prey that learned to hunt predators, Morrison finished. Admiral, in approximately 18 hours, the Zephyrian Advance Force is going to reach the Coalition defensive perimeter around Nexus Prime. They're expecting to encounter the same kind of organized resistance they've been defeating for the past 18 months. She gestured toward the viewport, where the distant flashes of the human fleet could barely be seen against the starfield. Instead, they're going to encounter Terran Marines who've spent 40 years preparing for exactly this kind of fight. Marines who've been trained specifically to operate in hostile environments against technologically superior enemies. 12 ships against a fleet of thousands, Chancellor Mortius pointed out. The mathematics alone. Mathematics assumes rational actors playing by consistent rules. Morrison interrupted. The Zephyrians have spent 18 months learning to counter Coalition tactics because Coalition tactics follow logical patterns. Our tactics follow human patterns. Which are? Morrison's expression grew distant, as if she were remembering something from a long time ago. When cornered, humans don't surrender gracefully. We bite, claw, and use every dirty trick we've learned in 10,000 years of fighting things bigger and stronger than we are. When outnumbered, we don't retreat to better ground. We make the ground we're on too expensive for the enemy to take. She refocused on Kythara with those unsettling predator eyes. And when we're protecting something we care about, we stop fighting like civilized beings and start fighting like what we really are. The meanest, most stubborn, most vindictively creative killers that evolution ever produced. The briefing room fell silent. Outside, the tactical displays showed the relentless advance of the Zephyrian fleet toward the Coalition's last major stronghold. In 18 hours, the fate of galactic civilization would be decided.
What do you need from us? Admiral Kythara asked finally.
Morrison consulted a device on her wrist that looked like no Coalition technology she had ever seen. Stay out of our way. Keep your defensive positions until we signal otherwise, and prepare for close-range combat support once we've softened them up. Soften them up? Commander Thylex repeated. General, you have 12 ships. I have 12 ships full of Marines who've been looking forward to this fight for 40 years, Morrison corrected. Marines who've trained their entire lives for hostile environment operations against overwhelming odds. Marines who consider impossible situations a form of entertainment. She stood up, indicating that the briefing was over. Admiral, you're about to see why the Galactic Coalition was right to be concerned about human military culture. You're also going to see why being concerned and being prepared are two very different things. As the humans prepared to leave, General Morrison paused at the door. One more thing, Admiral. When this starts, you're going to see things that don't match anything in your military databases. Your people might be tempted to interfere or try to assist. Don't. Why not? Morrison's smile returned, cold as space and twice as empty. Because when Terran Marines go to work, the difference between enemy and friendly fire is often a matter of perspective, and you really don't want to be on the wrong side of that equation. The humans left, returning to their impossible transport and their impossible fleet. Admiral Kythara stood at the viewport, watching the distant flashes of light that represented the last hope of galactic civilization, and wondered what kind of monsters she had invited into her war. In 18 hours, she would have her answer. In 18 hours, the Zephyrian hive would encounter something that no amount of adaptation could prepare them for. Humans who had learned to turn warfare itself into a weapon. 18 hours later, Admiral Kythara stood in the command center of her flagship, watching the impossible unfold on her tactical displays. The Zephyrian advance fleet had arrived exactly on schedule. A massive biological armada of over 3,000 vessels that moved through space like a living organism. The alien ships weren't constructed in any traditional sense. They were grown, evolved, adapted from the consumed matter of 14 worlds. Each vessel pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that served as both communication system and targeting data, creating a light show of terrifying beauty as the swarm approached Coalition positions. The Coalition defensive fleet, numbering nearly 800 ships arranged in the carefully planned formations that had once been the pride of galactic military science, waited in their assigned positions. Energy shields at maximum, weapons charging, point defense systems online. Everything done exactly according to 3 centuries of successful military doctrine. The 12 human ships had simply vanished. Admiral, Commander Thylex reported, his voice tight with confusion. I'm reading no trace of the human fleet. Our sensors show they were positioned at coordinates 247-889. 034 as of 30 minutes ago, but now... Nothing? Kythara asked, though she could see the answer on her own displays. Nothing, Admiral. It's as if they simply ceased to exist. which was impossible, of course. Ships that large couldn't just disappear, especially in open space, under constant sensor surveillance. Yet somehow, 12 massive human warships had managed to vanish completely just hours before the most important battle in galactic history. Perhaps they reconsidered their offer of assistance, Chancellor Mortius suggested, though his voice carried more hope than conviction. 12 ships against 3,000 was always a hopeless proposition. Before Admiral Kythara could respond, her communication officer looked up from his station with an expression of bewilderment. "Admiral, I'm receiving a transmission from General Morrison. Audio only, source unknown. Put it through." The general's voice filled the command center, transmitted from somewhere in the vast darkness of space. "Coalition forces, this is Morrison. In approximately 90 seconds, you're going to see things that don't match your tactical databases. Do not attempt to assist, do not break formation, and do not ask questions until this is over. Marines are going to work. Morrison out." The transmission cut, leaving the command center in tense silence. 90 seconds until what? Commander Thylex asked the question they were all thinking. The answer came exactly 90 seconds later, when the Zephyrian advance formation suddenly exploded into chaos. The first sign of attack wasn't the flash of weapons fire or the detonation of warheads. It was something far more disturbing. The Zephyrian bioships began screaming. Admiral Kythara had never heard anything like it. A sound that somehow transmitted through space itself, a biological shriek of pain and confusion that made every member of her crew instinctively flinch. On the tactical display, she watched as the orderly advance of the alien fleet dissolved into arriving massive ships moving in apparently random directions, their bioluminescent communication patterns flashing in what could only be described as panic. "What's happening to them?" Commander Thylex demanded, frantically working his control station to get clear sensor readings. "Unknown, Admiral," the sensor operator replied. "I'm reading massive energy discharges throughout the Zephyrian formation, but I can't identify the source. Whatever's attacking them isn't showing up on our scans." Then the explosions began. Zephyrian bioships, each one the size of a coalition cruiser, simply began disintegrating, not from external bombardment, but from within. They burst apart like overripe fruit, spewing biological matter and mechanical components into space while their death screams added to the growing cacophony of alien agony. "There," Kythara's tactical officer pointed to the main display. "Movement patterns in the debris field." For just a moment, Admiral Kythara caught a glimpse of something impossible, the outline of a human ship, visible only as a distortion in the expanding cloud of organic debris. As she watched, the outline flickered and vanished again, but not before she saw weapons fire lance out from its position to tear through 3 more Zephyrian vessels. "Cloaking technology?" she whispered. But even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't that simple. Coalition forces had experimented with stealth systems for centuries, but nothing that could hide ships that large while they were actively engaged in combat. The energy signatures alone should have been impossible to mask. "Admiral," her communication officer called out, "I'm picking up human transmissions. Military communications on encrypted channels. I can't decode them, but the traffic volume suggests coordinated unit deployment." Kythara stared at the chaos consuming the Zephyrian fleet. Coordinated deployment implied multiple units operating independently, which meant, "How many ships?" she asked quietly. "Unknown, Admiral, but based on communication patterns, possibly dozens." Dozens. But they had only seen 12 ships in the human fleet. "Unless General Morrison," she said suddenly, keying her communication system to broadcast on all frequencies. "Admiral Kythara requesting tactical update. What is your current force deployment?" The response came immediately, Morrison's voice carrying the relaxed tone of someone conducting routine business. 12 Reaper-class battle carriers, Admiral, each one deploying 6 Marine expeditionary units with full combat support. We're currently conducting simultaneous multi-vector assault operations against 68 priority targets. 72 Marine units. 72 independent forces operating inside the Zephyrian fleet, invisible to coalition sensors, tearing apart ships that had proven immune to every weapon in the galactic arsenal. "How?" Kythara asked, abandoning any pretense of military protocol. "Adaptive camouflage, neural suppression fields, and good old-fashioned close-quarters combat," Morrison replied. "The bugs are used to fighting at long range with energy weapons and biomissiles. They've never encountered boarding parties equipped with kinetic weapons and personal stealth systems. Boarding parties." The humans were inside the Zephyrian ships. Admiral Kythara watched the tactical display with growing amazement and horror. The alien fleet, which had seemed unstoppable just minutes before, was literally being torn apart from within. Ships that had adapted to resist plasma cannons and particle beams were helpless against enemies who had simply gotten close enough to walk through their hulls and start killing everything inside.
Status report, Morrison's voice continued, apparently addressing her own forces. Unit 7, what's your situation? A different human voice responded, speaking in the same casual tone, despite the sound of weapons fire and alien screams in the background.
7 is inside primary bioship command center. We've neutralized the control organism and are setting charges on the neural interface clusters. Estimate 30 seconds to structural collapse. Copy that, 7. Unit 12, report. 12, here. We've breached the spawning chambers on target Delta 4. Looks like they were growing new warriors in here. Not anymore. Burn and clear operations in progress. Outstanding. All units be advised. The bugs are starting to adapt to our kinetic weapons. Switch to secondary loadouts and prepare for close combat operations. Close combat. The humans weren't just boarding the alien ships, they were fighting hand-to-hand with creatures that had been specifically evolved for warfare. Admiral, Commander Thylek said in a voice barely above a whisper, the Zephyrian fleet is beginning to reorganize. They're pulling back from the damaged ships and forming new attack formations. Kithara could see it on the tactical display. Despite losing over 200 ships in the past few minutes, the Zephyrian hive mind was adapting to the human attack. The remaining bioships were clustering together, creating overlapping defensive fields that would make boarding operations more difficult. General Morrison, she transmitted, the enemy is adapting to your tactics. They're consolidating their formation and... We see it, Morrison replied calmly. All Marine units, this is Morrison. The bugs are learning. Time to teach them why that's a bad idea. Switch to Protocol 7. Copy, General. All units switching to Protocol 7. Admiral Kithara had no idea what Protocol 7 meant, but she was about to find out. The change in the human attack pattern was immediately apparent. Instead of the surgical strikes that had been tearing apart individual bioships, the tactical display suddenly showed coordinated mass assaults on the Zephyrian defensive clusters. But these weren't boarding operations. These were something else entirely. Energy signatures spiking throughout the human engagement zones, the sensor operator reported. Admiral, I'm reading weapon discharges that don't match anything in our databases. These energy levels are... concerning. The first indication of what Protocol 7 involved came when an entire section of the Zephyrian formation simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not dispersed, simply gone, leaving behind an empty sphere of space where 50 bioships had been moments before. What weapon can do that? Chancellor Mortius asked, his voice tight with fear. Before anyone could answer, another section of the alien fleet vanished. Then, another. The massive Zephyrian formation, which had seemed so overwhelming just minutes before, was disappearing piece by piece as if some invisible force was simply erasing it from existence. General Morrison, Admiral Kithara transmitted. What weapons are you deploying? Our sensors are reading energy signatures that seem to violate. Classified, Admiral, Morrison replied. Let's just say that 40 years of preparation included developing some creative solutions to the problem of overwhelming enemy numbers. Creative solutions that could eliminate dozens of ships at once without leaving any trace of what had happened to them. Kithara felt her mandibles click involuntarily as she began to understand just how completely the humans had been concealing their true capabilities. All coalition forces, Morrison continued, be advised that we're about to engage the Zephyrian command ship. You may want to move your people to a safe distance. How far is safe? Kithara asked. How far can you get in the next 60 seconds? Admiral Kithara gave the order to retreat to maximum sensor range, pulling the entire coalition fleet back to what she hoped was a safe observation distance. As they moved away from the battle zone, she watched the tactical display show the remaining human forces converging on the massive Zephyrian command vessel, a bioship larger than any coalition battleship, pulsing with the neural activity of the hive mind that controlled the entire invasion fleet. General, she transmitted, that ship contains the central intelligence for the entire Zephyrian fleet. If you can capture it intact, we might be able to... Negative, Admiral, Morrison replied. We don't take prisoners. The human assault on the Zephyrian command ship began with what appeared to be a conventional boarding operation. Admiral Kithara watched as small craft detached from the invisible human vessels and moved toward the alien flagship. But as they approached, something happened that made her question everything she thought she understood about warfare. The human boarding craft didn't dock with the enemy ship. Instead, they seemed to merge with its hull, disappearing into the biomechanical structure as if they had been absorbed. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the Zephyrian command ship began to change. The bioluminescent patterns that had pulsed across its hull flickered and went dark. The organic movements that had given it the appearance of a living creature slowed and stopped. And then, impossibly, the massive vessel began to turn its weapons on the remaining ships of its own fleet. "They've taken control of it!" Commander Thylex breathed. "They've captured the hive mind." But even as he spoke, Admiral Kithara could see that wasn't quite right. The Zephyrian command ship wasn't firing with the precision of a captured vessel under new management. Its weapons blazed with the uncontrolled fury of a creature in its death throes, lashing out at anything within range. The other bioships, suddenly cut off from their central intelligence, began attacking each other in confusion and panic. "General Morrison," Kithara transmitted, "what have you done?" Morrison's response carried a note of grim satisfaction. "We've introduced the hive mind to a human concept called going down fighting. The neural control organism is experiencing rapid neurological cascade failure, induced by exposure to Terran marine combat stimulants. Combat stimulants that could cause neurological failure in a hive mind." Admiral Kithara realized that she was watching the human equivalent of using biological warfare, but turned into something far more devastating. The Zephyrian command ship's death throes lasted exactly 7 minutes. When it finally exploded, taking a dozen nearby bioships with it, the remaining alien fleet simply stopped. Without the hive mind to coordinate their actions, the individual ships drifted aimlessly through space like a school of fish that had suddenly lost their collective intelligence. "All Marine units, this is Morrison," the general's voice carried across the communication channels. "Clean-up operations are now in effect. Hunt down any stragglers and confirm kills. I want every bug in this system dead in the next 30 minutes. Copy, General. Beginning search and destroy operations." Admiral Kithara watched as the invisible human forces methodically hunted down the remaining Zephyrian ships. These weren't combat engagements. They were executions. Ships that had proven capable of adapting to any weapon the Coalition deployed were destroyed without being able to mount any defense against enemies they couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't predict. In exactly 28 minutes, the tactical display showed empty space where the most powerful invasion fleet in galactic history had once threatened to consume another world. "General Morrison," Admiral Kithara transmitted, "the Zephyrian advance fleet has been eliminated. What are your casualties?" 17 wounded, mostly from hand-to-hand combat operations," Morrison replied. "No fatalities. Marines are conducting post-battle intelligence gathering and preparing for Phase 2 operations. 17 wounded. Out of 72 Marine units that had just destroyed a fleet of 3,000 bioships, Admiral Kithara felt her stomach's turn as she began to understand the true scale of human military capability. "Phase 2? She asked. "The main Zephyrian fleet is approximately 3 days behind this advance force," Morrison explained. "Preliminary intelligence suggests they're bringing everything they have, probably 50,000 ships or more. We'll need to adjust our tactics accordingly." 50,000 ships. The number was so large it barely registered as meaningful. The entire Coalition fleet, at its peak, had numbered less than 10,000 vessels. "General," Admiral Kithara said carefully, 50,000 ships would represent the combined military strength of dozens of star systems. How can 12 human vessels possibly?"
Who said anything about 12 vessels? Morrison interrupted.
"Admiral, this was just the advance force. The real fleet is still en route." "The real fleet." Admiral Kithara stared at the empty space where the Zephyrian advance force had been obliterated by what the humans considered a small reconnaissance unit. "How many ships are you bringing?" she asked. Morrison's response carried the same casual tone she had used throughout the battle, as if discussing routine patrol operations. "That depends on how many Marines we need to finish this job properly. But don't worry, Admiral. We've been planning for this kind of operation for 40 years. In the depths of space, invisible to Coalition sensors, the Terran Marine Corps was preparing to teach the galaxy what happened when someone threatened to eat the species that had once hunted saber-toothed cats for entertainment. 3 days after the annihilation of the Zephyrian advance fleet, Admiral Kithara learned what General Morrison had meant when she said the humans had brought enough. The revelation began with what her sensor operators initially dismissed as instrument malfunction. Long-range detection arrays started registering contact signatures that made no mathematical sense. Vessels appearing at the edge of Coalition space in numbers that exceeded the theoretical carrying capacity of the local star systems. Admiral, Lieutenant Vexhai called from the sensor station, his voice tight with confusion. I'm reading massive displacement signatures throughout the outer system, but the numbers are unprecedented. Kithara moved to examine the data herself and felt her stomachs drop. The tactical display showed contact after contact appearing at the edge of sensor range. Not dozens or hundreds, but thousands. Each signature represented a vessel roughly the size of the human ships that had destroyed the Zephyrian advance force. How many? She asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Still counting, Admiral, but preliminary estimates suggest 12,000 vessels, possibly more. 12,000. The number hung in the air like a death sentence for everything the Coalition thought it understood about human military capability. Admiral Kithara stared at the display, watching as more and more contacts appeared at the edge of sensor range, each one representing a level of technological and industrial advancement that should have been impossible for a single species. Lieutenant, verify those readings. There must be some kind of sensor error. Verified, Admiral, cross-checking with all available detection systems. The contacts are real. He paused, working frantically at his controls. Admiral, I'm reading additional signatures. Different. Different how? Before Lieutenant Vexhai could respond, Admiral Kithara's communication system activated without her authorization. General Morrison's voice filled the command center, transmitted from somewhere in the vast armada that was materializing at the edge of Coalition space. Admiral Kithara, this is Morrison. Request permission for fleet commanders to come aboard your flagship for final tactical briefing. Fleet commanders, Kithara repeated. General, how many? We've brought representatives from all major marine units, Morrison interrupted. This operation requires coordination between multiple specialized forces. Full briefing starts in 30 minutes. The communication cut, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Admiral Kithara looked around at her officers, seeing her own bewilderment reflected in their expressions. Major marine units. Multiple specialized forces. The humans were treating this like a full-scale military campaign involving resources that dwarfed anything the Coalition had ever assembled. 28 minutes later, Admiral Kithara stood in her primary briefing room, watching as human officers filed in wearing uniforms she didn't recognize. Not the matte black combat gear worn by Morrison's advance force, but formal military dress that spoke of ranks, specializations, and institutional structures far more complex than anything in Coalition intelligence files. General Morrison entered last, accompanied by 5 other humans whose bearing and insignia suggested they held positions of significant authority. As they took their seats around the briefing table, Kithara noticed that each officer carried themselves with the same predatory awareness she had observed in the advance force, but tempered with something that looked disturbingly like professional experience in large-scale warfare. Admiral, Morrison began without preamble, allow me to introduce the operational commanders for this engagement. General Chen, 4th Marine Expeditionary Force. General Rodriguez, Special Operations Command. General Okafor, Fleet Marine Force Atlantic. General Singh, Rapid Deployment Forces, and General Thompson, Strategic Response Command. Each name was accompanied by a nod from an officer who looked like they had spent decades preparing for exactly this kind of operation. Admiral Kithara found herself wondering just how large the human military really was and how they had managed to hide it so completely for 4 decades. Generals, she said carefully, welcome to Coalition space. I must confess that your fleet's strength far exceeds what our intelligence indicated was possible for your species. Your intelligence was deliberately limited, General Chen replied, her voice carrying the same matter-of-fact tone that seemed universal among human officers. For 40 years, Earth has maintained a policy of strategic deception regarding our actual military capabilities. Why? Because we knew this day would come, General Rodriguez answered. When we were rejected for Coalition membership, our analysis indicated that galactic civilization was unprepared for existential threats. Too much reliance on diplomatic solutions, too much faith in technological superiority, not enough understanding of evolutionary warfare. General Singh leaned forward, activating a holographic display that showed star charts Admiral Kithara had never seen before. We've been monitoring galactic communications for decades, Admiral. We knew about the Zephyrian Hive long before they became a threat to Coalition space. We also knew that when they finally moved against civilized worlds, existing military doctrine would be inadequate. So you prepared, Chancellor Mortius said, his voice carrying an edge of accusation. You prepared for a war you knew was coming without warning the Coalition. We offered to help with the rough stuff, General Morrison pointed out. The Coalition declined our membership application and made it clear that human military culture was considered too primitive for galactic society. We took that as guidance about how much assistance would be welcomed. General Thompson activated additional displays, showing tactical projections that made Admiral Cathara's mandibles click involuntarily. The Zephyrian main fleet is approximately 60 hours from Coalition core systems. Intelligence indicates they're bringing everything, approximately 52,000 vessels, including breeding ships, construction platforms, and command hierarchies for at least 6 different hive subspecies. 52,000 ships. The number was so overwhelming that Admiral Cathara felt her secondary heart skip a beat. Even with 12,000 human vessels, the mathematics were horrifying. "General," she said carefully, "while we appreciate your assistance, the odds against us remain." "Acceptable," General Okafor finished. "Admiral, you're thinking about this engagement in terms of ship-to-ship combat ratios. The Zephyrians are also thinking in those terms, which is why they've committed their entire military force to this operation. They expect to face organized resistance from fixed defensive positions using predictable tactical doctrine." "And they won't be facing that?" General Morrison smiled, and Admiral Cathara felt that familiar chill of recognition, the smile of a predator that had found something entertaining in the prospect of violence. "They're going to face the United Earth Defense Force operating under Total War protocols," Morrison explained. 40 years of technological development, military expansion, and tactical preparation specifically designed for fighting existential threats against overwhelming odds. She manipulated the holographic display, showing the human fleet in detail for the first time. Admiral Cathara stared at the images in growing amazement. These weren't just warships. They were mobile fortresses, each one bristling with weapons systems and defensive technologies that seemed to have been designed by someone who had studied every known form of space combat and then invented 12 new ways to kill things. "How?" was all she managed to ask. "Earth has a total population of 14 billion humans," General Chen answered. "Of that population, approximately 1 billion are active military personnel, with another 2 billion in reserve status. Our industrial output has been focused exclusively on military production for the past 4 decades. 1 billion active military personnel." Admiral Cathara tried to process the implications of a species that had militarized nearly 10% of its total population. The Coalition's combined military forces from all member species numbered in the low millions. "That's not sustainable," Commander Thylex protested. "No civilization can maintain that level of military spending without economic collapse. Most civilizations can't," General Rodriguez agreed. "But most civilizations don't approach warfare as a species-wide survival activity. Humans have a saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. We've been preparing very thoroughly." General Singh brought up new tactical displays showing deployment patterns that stretched across multiple star systems. The Zephyrian fleet is advancing in a concentrated formation designed to maximize their adaptive advantages. They're planning to overwhelm each defensive position through superior numbers and rapid technological adaptation. "Standard hive tactics," Admiral Cathara observed. "They've used the same approach successfully against 14 Coalition worlds." "Correct. Which is why we're not going to give them defensive positions to overwhelm." General Thompson highlighted sections of the tactical display, showing movement patterns that looked like nothing in any military database Admiral Cathara had ever seen. "We're going to introduce them to a human tactical concept called maneuver warfare, which involves making them fight the war we want instead of the war they've prepared for," General Morrison explained. "The Zephyrians have spent 18 months learning to counter Coalition defensive strategies. They've never encountered an enemy that refuses to be defensive." She brought up detailed schematics of human military equipment, and Admiral Cathara felt her worldview shift again. These weren't just advanced weapons. They were systems designed specifically for aggressive, mobile operations against technologically superior enemies. Everything from personal armor that could operate in any environment to ships that seemed designed to fight while moving at speeds that should have torn them apart. 40 years ago, when the Coalition rejected our membership application, we conducted a detailed analysis of galactic military doctrine. General Okafor continued. "We identified several fundamental assumptions that made civilized warfare predictable. Fixed defensive positions, preservation of infrastructure, rules of engagement that prioritize minimizing collateral damage. Civilization requires those constraints," Chancellor Mortius insisted. "Maybe," General Singh acknowledged. "But survival sometimes requires abandoning them. The Zephyrians are counting on civilized restraint to limit Coalition response options. They've never faced an enemy that considers total warfare an acceptable response to existential threats. Admiral Kythara studied the tactical projections, trying to understand what she was seeing. The human deployment pattern didn't look like any military formation she recognized. Instead of organized battle lines or defensive positions, it looked like chaos. Thousands of ships moving in apparently random patterns throughout multiple star systems, with no apparent coordination or central strategy. General, this deployment pattern appears to lack any organizational structure. How do you coordinate operations with forces scattered across such a wide area? We don't coordinate, General Morrison replied. Each Marine unit operates independently according to mission parameters. No central command structure for the Zephyrians to target, no predictable patterns for them to analyze, no single point of failure that could compromise the entire operation. That's anarchistic, Commander Thylex observed. That's effective, General Chen corrected. Humans learned a long time ago that the most dangerous enemy is one that refuses to fight according to your expectations. Every human unit has been trained to operate independently, adapt to changing circumstances, and accomplish mission objectives regardless of what happens to the rest of the force. General Thompson brought up additional displays showing what appeared to be industrial facilities in deep space. We've also prepared for extended operations, mobile shipyards, automated manufacturing platforms, resource extraction facilities. If necessary, this fleet can maintain operations indefinitely without returning to Earth for resupply. Indefinitely. Admiral Kythara realized she was looking at evidence of a military machine that had been designed not just to fight a war, but to fight until there was nothing left to fight. The humans hadn't just prepared for battle, they had prepared for the complete annihilation of their enemies, regardless of cost or duration. There's something else you need to understand, General Morrison said, her expression growing serious. The Zephyrian hive represents an existential threat not just to the Coalition, but to all sapient life in this galaxy. They don't negotiate, they don't retreat, and they don't stop consuming until they've processed every available biological resource. We are aware of the nature of the threat, Admiral Kythara replied. Are you? General Rodriguez leaned forward, his eyes carrying the same predatory intensity that seemed universal among human military personnel. Because we've run the projections, Admiral, if the Zephyrians succeed in conquering Coalition space, they'll have access to the industrial resources of 47 different star systems. That level of resource base would allow them to expand beyond this galaxy within a century. The implications hung in the air like a death sentence for the universe itself. Admiral Kythara had been thinking in terms of defending Coalition space, but the humans were thinking in terms of preventing the complete consumption of all life in the known universe. So what are you proposing? She asked. General Morrison's smile returned, cold as the vacuum of space. Total war, Admiral. We're going to kill every Zephyrian in this galaxy, destroy their breeding capacity, and eliminate their ability to threaten any other species ever again. Even if that requires?
Whatever it requires, General Singh finished.
Admiral, humans have a saying. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. We've spent 40 years making sure that when the time came, we'd be prepared to do everything. Outside the viewport, Admiral Kythara could see the distant flashes of the human fleet. 12,000 warships crewed by beings who had spent 4 decades preparing for a fight they knew was coming. A species that had been rejected for being too primitive and aggressive was about to demonstrate why those traits might be exactly what the galaxy needed. When do we begin? She asked. General Morrison consulted a device on her wrist that looked like it could probably target enemy ships from personal range. The Zephyrian fleet will be in range in 57 hours. We begin in 56 hours and 30 minutes. Why 30 minutes before they arrive? Morrison's predator smile widened. Because humans prefer to start fights on our own terms, Admiral.
And our terms don't include giving the enemy time to adapt to our opening move.
Admiral Kythara realized she was about to witness something that had never happened in galactic history. A species that had been dismissed as too primitive for civilized society was about to teach the universe what total war really meant. 56 hours and 30 minutes after the final briefing, Admiral Kythara witnessed the birth of a new era in galactic warfare. The Zephyrian main fleet arrived exactly on schedule, a biological armada so vast that it blotted out the stars, 52,000 vessels moving through space like a living plague. Each ship pulsed with the bioluminescent patterns of the hive mind, creating a light show that would have been beautiful if it hadn't represented the complete annihilation of galactic civilization. At the heart of the formation moved the Zephyrian prime ship. a creature vessel the size of a small moon that served as the central nervous system for the entire invasion force. Around it, breeding ships carrying millions of warrior organisms moved in protective formations, while scout vessels probed ahead for signs of coalition resistance. The coalition fleet waited in their assigned positions, 800 ships arranged in the defensive formations that had once been the pride of galactic military science. They represented the combined naval power of 47 civilizations, equipped with weapons that could shatter planets and shields that had never been breached. Everything done exactly according to 3 centuries of successful military doctrine. The 12,000 human ships had vanished again. Admiral, Commander Thylex reported from his station, the Zephyrian fleet is maintaining standard approach formation. They appear to be scanning for defensive positions and preparing for sustained assault operations. Admiral Kythara nodded, watching the tactical display show the inexorable advance of the alien armada. According to every simulation her tactical computers had run, the coalition fleet would last approximately 17 minutes against an enemy force of this magnitude. Even with human assistance, the mathematics remained overwhelming. "Any contact with General Morrison?" she asked. "Negative, Admiral. The human fleet has maintained communication silence since their final deployment 30 minutes ago. 30 minutes ago, when they had simply disappeared from coalition sensors as if they had never existed." Admiral Kythara found herself wondering if the humans had reconsidered their commitment to this hopeless battle, or if they were about to demonstrate that the word hopeless had different meanings for different species. "Admiral," her communication officer called out, "I'm receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian fleet. They're demanding our immediate surrender." "Put it through." The voice that filled the command center belonged to no single creature, but to the collective intelligence of the hive mind itself. Millions of voices speaking in unison, creating harmonies that made Admiral Kythara's chitin crawl with instinctive fear. "Coalition vessels," the hive mind spoke in perfect galactic standard. "You will surrender immediately and prepare for processing. Resistance will result in unnecessary damage to biological resources. Compliance will ensure efficient integration into our collective." Admiral Kythara keyed her response with steady hands, despite the fear that threatened to lock her mandibles. "This is Admiral Kythara of the Galactic Coalition Defense Forces. We reject your terms and will defend ourselves according to our legal and moral obligations." "Your defiance is noted and irrelevant," the hive mind replied. "We have analyzed your tactical capabilities and defensive positions. Your destruction will be completed in 16 minutes and 43 seconds. Beginning assault operations." The communication cut, and Admiral Kythara watched as the Zephyrian fleet began its final approach. 52,000 ships moving with the coordinated precision of a single organism, their weapons charging with energy levels that made coalition plasma cannons look like children's toys. 16 minutes and 43 seconds. She wondered if the hive mind's calculations had accounted for human intervention, or if the aliens were about to learn why mathematical precision meant nothing when your enemy refused to follow the rules. "Admiral," Lieutenant Vexerhai called from the sensor station. "I'm reading massive energy buildups throughout the Zephyrian formation. They're preparing to engage at maximum range with concentrated firepower." "All coalition forces, this is Admiral Kythara," she transmitted to her fleet. "Prepare for combat operations. Shields to maximum, weapons free, point defense systems active. Fight well, and know that our sacrifice serves a greater purpose." It was a speech she had never wanted to give, but one that seemed appropriate for what might be the last battle of galactic civilization. Around her, the command center crew worked with the desperate efficiency of beings who knew they were facing impossible odds. Then the universe exploded, not from Zephyrian weapons, but from something else entirely. Something that had been waiting in the darkness for exactly the right moment to announce its presence. The first sign of the human attack wasn't visible on sensors or tactical displays. It was audible, a sound that somehow transmitted through the vacuum of space itself, a deep, rhythmic pounding that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Admiral Kythara felt it in her bones before she heard it, a percussion that spoke of massive engines operating in perfect synchronization. "What is that sound?" Commander Thylex asked, his voice tight with confusion. Before Admiral Kythara could respond, her communication officer provided an answer that made her mandibles click involuntarily. "Admiral, I'm picking up human audio transmissions. They appear to be music. In the middle of the most important battle in galactic history, the humans were broadcasting music." Admiral Kythara listened to the steady, driving rhythm that seemed designed to synchronize with the heartbeat of beings preparing for violence, and realized she was hearing something that no civilized species would ever consider appropriate for warfare. General Morrison, she transmitted. Admiral Cathara requesting tactical update. What is your current status? The response came immediately, Morrison's voice carrying the same casual confidence that had become disturbingly familiar. All units in position, Admiral. Marines are locked and loaded. We're about to show these bugs what happens when they threaten to eat our friends. General, what is that music? Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries, Morrison replied, as if that explained everything. Traditional pre-battle music for operations involving overwhelming enemy forces. Helps the Marines get in the right frame of mind. Before Admiral Cathara could ask what frame of mind required classical music, the Zephyrian fleet opened fire. 52,000 bioships unleashed their weapons simultaneously, creating a wave of destruction that should have vaporized the coalition defensive line in seconds. Plasma bolts the size of asteroids, biomissiles that could adapt to any defensive system, energy beams,